Burns.
Ladies and gentlemen, Christy Turlington Burns.
Wow, they weren't kidding back there. You guys are something to behold. 6,500 ladies and a few gents. Good afternoon, and thank you to the Massachusetts Conference for Women for inviting me to speak today. It is an honor to be here amongst all of you, and I couldn't think of a better audience to speak before than a group of women who have come together to network, motivate, and inspire one another. I am a longtime believer in the power of women as connectors, and this annual conference is an important reminder of the many issues that matter most to modern women: personal finance, entrepreneurship, juggling the balance between life and work, and of course, our health. When I was first asked to participate in this year's conference, given my focus on maternal health, I was immediately drawn to its core principle: women helping women. We're here to help each other on all those things, to support our collective efforts to better live a life of intention. I'll share with you a bit about my own journey to find my purpose, but I want to go a step further. You see, the idea of women helping women is a pretty big mandate, but that same magnitude is its brilliance. The idea can be as big as we allow it to be, and I think big. But first things first. For some of you, I may be familiar because of my career as a model, but today I stand before you as a career woman, a mother, a student, a documentary filmmaker, and an advocate for maternal health. My career path has been anything but what most would consider normal. I began modeling at the age of 14. I'm 41 today. Well, I'm almost 42. It's almost 28 years. And by the ripe old age of 16, I was spending my first summer on my own in Manhattan, working with Vogue on a regular basis. I continued my high school studies for as long as I could, but ultimately I opted for an independent studies program, which I continued with until I turned 18 and moved into my own apartment in Manhattan. For the next year or so, it became my mother's mission to get me to come back home to graduate and receive my diploma, and thankfully I did. Luckily for me, I realized pretty quickly that just being a model wasn't going to be enough. I landed my first big exclusive contract with Calvin Klein about a year later at the age of 19, which only required my services for about 20 days a year, but I was restricted from working for anyone else. So at 19, when my sisters and my school friends were all in college, I began to self-evaluate, and I started to create a curriculum of my own. This included taking classes in just about everything: writing, French, cooking, horseback riding, meditation, yoga. But about 2 years later, I ended the exclusivity aspect of my contract, and I started working and traveling again as a model. By now, it was the early 90s and the start of what in the fashion industry has come to be known as the supermodel era. It was an interesting couple of years, and I enjoyed most every minute of it, especially the traveling bit. But by the time I was 25, I was ready for a challenge, and I knew then that I was ready to continue my education. I applied to NYU's Gallatin School that spring and started classes the following fall. This was an incredible time for me. School kept me in New York, and for the first time in years, I was able to make a home for myself. I took courses in everything I had an interest in at school, from art history to American literature, philosophy, and religion. But then, when I was about halfway through my undergraduate studies, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I spent the following 6 months commuting back and forth to California, where I grew up, to manage his treatment and care. I had been a smoker myself in my teens and into my early 20s, and watching my dad suffer as he did because he had been a lifelong smoker was the impetus in my interest in public health. My father died 6 months after he was diagnosed in the summer of 1997. I would spend the next few years focusing on finishing school, practicing a lot of yoga, and dedicating most of my personal time on advocacy around smoking cessation and prevention. My advocacy work has always involved sharing my own story. In this case, as a smoker who had fought hard to give up an addiction of my own, and as the daughter who'd lost a loved one to a preventable disease. 2 years later, I graduated from NYU in 1999 with honors at the age of 30. And from there, I began to diversify my career while deepening my connections to yoga. I started 2 businesses, Sundari, the first luxury organic skincare line based on the principles of the Indian philosophy Ayurveda, and Nuala, a yoga-inspired clothing line that I created in partnership with Puma, which stood for natural, universal, altruistic, limitless, and authentic. I wrote a book about yoga as well, which was an exercise that I hope produced a helpful resource to the novice, but also gave me the time to focus on the practice and what it meant for me during such important turning points in my own life. In my search for purpose, I looked a bit further. My mom was born in El Salvador. I was fortunate to have traveled there from an early age and to visit family, as well as to travel the world more broadly as an adult for my career. I've gained a global perspective of the world and my place in it. I've always been keenly aware of the distinctions between the developed and developing world and the disparities in basic human rights in both. This global dimension started finding its way back into many aspects of my work and life. In 2005, I was invited by the humanitarian organization CARE to travel with them to see the scope of work they were doing to eradicate global poverty. I was also there to support my friends launch the One campaign and RED, the effort to help fund efforts to fight HIV/AIDS. In my free time these days, I'm pursuing a master's degree in public health at Columbia University's Mailman School in New York. In all of these endeavors, both entrepreneurial and philanthropic, I realized one critical, important link to advancing global development: the power of girls and women. Everywhere I traveled, every course I took, every interrelated issue I delved into, all seemed to point to one common link: women. Both because they are disproportionately burdened by so many development and health challenges, but also because they hold the key to overcoming those challenges. Case in point, you probably heard this statistic before, that women are responsible for 80% of agriculture in Africa. This, of course, is done while tending the children, gathering the water, amongst many other things. Thank goodness we're good multitaskers. So women may face the greatest burden of work, but if given the tools and technologies to invest in higher yield crops or new irrigation strategies, we will adopt them because we share the information with our neighbors. We will, in short, support each other to lift our entire community. And what about the HIV crisis? In sub-Saharan Africa, young women are 8 times more likely than men to be HIV positive. But when given the access to testing and effective prevention strategies, women take charge and protect themselves and their partners. They take advantage of treatment to prevent their children from contracting the virus. So I knew then that more has to be done to invest in girls and women if we are really to make a difference. But it took another deeply personal experience to bring me here today. 7 years ago, after delivering my first child, I began to hemorrhage. My complication was managed efficiently by my midwife and the obstetrician who backed her. But I knew how lucky I was, and in the months that followed the birth of my daughter, I began to consider what this complication could mean for women without access to pre- and postnatal care.